That's pretty awesome. That is, if you know, that is George Washington. I mean, it's not the actual George Washington. He's dead. It's Christopher Jackson portraying George Washington in the musical Hamilton. Hands up if you like musicals. Have we got a couple musical? Oh, yeah. Big musical fans. See, I don't like musicals at all. Really can't stand musicals, to be honest. The idea of someone sing-talking to me is like my worst nightmare, so really didn't want to be a musical person. But a while ago, my sister recommended Hamilton to me. She was like, Ellis, you need to watch this. And you know when people recommend for you to watch things, they do that thing where they're like, oh, you need to watch this, and you go, yeah, I'll get round to it, and then you don't. Yeah, I did that for like 3 years. So for 3 years, Maddie was like, you must watch this. You must see it. I was like, nah, I don't think so. And then all of a sudden, Beth Ann, my wife, she was watching it. I walked in the room, she was watching it, and I thought, oh, that looks quite good. What's that? She was like, it's Hamilton. I was like, oh, I might watch that. And much to my sister's annoyance, I then eventually watched Hamilton and absolutely loved it. It hasn't completely won me over on musicals yet. Still got some way to go on that, but I did absolutely love it. And I found that song particularly powerful. I thought it was a really powerful song. In that song, George Washington is talking with Alexander Hamilton, essentially preparing for the Battle of Yorktown, which will be the biggest battle of the American Civil War. It's a huge conflict that will eventually, the Americans will win, and they will go on to be free from their English oppressors. So he's essentially kind of preparing Hamilton for this battle. He's setting the scene. And it's a big battle. So Washington's speech is big. It's full of big challenges. Things like history has its eyes on you. You have no control who lives, who dies, and who tells your story. This confidence of victory, all of these really big ideas. And they go on to develop throughout the musical. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of these ideas. I want to dig into them a bit more because when I heard this for the first time, it really inspired me, and it just stuck with me. Do you know when you hear a song for the first time or you hear something that's particularly powerful, it just sticks with you and it won't go away, and it was just clinging, and I was like, what? Why am I listening to this on repeat on my journey to work every single day? You know, like it was stuck. I mean, it's a great song, but it was just there. It wouldn't leave me alone. And eventually, I think I've worked out why. And if it's okay, I'd like to share it with you this morning. I love when preachers do that, by the way. You know, ask if it's okay. It's like, well, I haven't got a second preach planned, so you better like this one because this is the other one we've got. Yes. So let's pray together before we dive in, and yeah, we'll get into things. God, I want to thank you for this time together today. I want to thank you for the privilege that it is that we get to gather publicly and read from your word and learn together. God, I ask that you would open our hearts, that you would have us be ready to hear from you. And we surrender this time to you, God, that you would do as you wish with it. In your mighty and wonderful name, amen. Amen. So, I'm going to be talking about Hamilton and Hebrews. I'm going to be talking about Hamilton and Hebrews. So that's really where this song took me to. When I heard this song, it reminded me of a passage from the book of Hebrews. Now, if you don't know what the book of Hebrews is, it's the best book in the New Testament, unbiased opinion. I wrote my dissertation on it. And it's also a book that was written to probably a Jewish Christian community. So it's actually a really helpful book for understanding the Old Testament. So if you're someone who's never really been able to grasp the Old Testament and understand the point in it, Hebrews is a really great place to start. Diving into Hebrews and having a read is a really great place to start on getting to grips with the Old Testament, because the writer of Hebrews is writing to people who knew the Old Testament intimately. So they will have known the importance of a lot of the verses that I'm going to share with you. So we're going to dive into Hebrews 11. So if you've got a Bible with you, we're going to be in Hebrews 11. If you've got a physical Bible, you do get bonus points for that. If you've got your phone Bible, you don't get many points. Mark was talking about, on the Cross series, he was talking about, it's not behavior management, But I disagree. I think it should be a points-based system where, we all get points for different things that we do. And again, I think it should start today, because I've actually brought my physical Bible with me for the first time in about 3 years, so from now on, we're counting points, okay? No, of course, it's not a points-based system. We're going to start in Hebrews 11, and we're going to read from verses 1 and 2 to start with. It says this: "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation." It's a really, really simple verse, and it sets the scene for us. It starts by telling us this is what faith is. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things unseen. Now, in his series on the cross, Mark talked deeply about how important faith is. It is vital to the life of any Christian to have faith. It's super important, but it's also not easy. You know, we're not going to stand up here and be like, oh, just have faith in everything and it will be fine and all your problems will disappear. That is not what faith is. It's almost like a tool that can help us in our lives rather than a solution in that sense. It's not going to solve our problems, but it certainly will help us when we're struggling, to know that we have a God who is with us in that situation. As humans, we inherently trust and put faith in things we see. Each one of you has put faith in the chair that you are sat on this morning. You know, I'm sure we've all had moments where we've gone to sit down on something that isn't there, and it's awfully embarrassing. But as humans, inherently, we trust in the things that we can see. We trust in what we know, and that's what's difficult about faith. Faith is trusting and having assurance, as the author of Hebrews put it, in things that we can't see. So faith is a real challenge for us. The author of Hebrews then goes on throughout verses 3 to 40, and I'm going to summarize them in 2 words for you. By faith. This is what he says. For the next 40 or so verses, he goes on to talk about this incredible list of names. All of these Old Testament individuals and characters lived by faith, and that's the point that he makes. Talks about people like Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. It's a huge list of really, really important figures. And if you ever wanted a synopsis on what their story is, the author of Hebrews does a great job of summarizing each of those stories. But what's the point? He writes this big list of people who've lived by faith. And his conclusion in verse 39 is quite strange. He says, I have to open my Bible to read it. He says, "And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God has provided something better for us, then apart from us they should not be made perfect." It's this incredible list of amazing characters, and yet there's this odd conclusion where he's like, oh, by the way, all of the things that they had faith in, they never actually saw that happen. And that can be quite depressing. It's like, oh, well, I was really motivated by, this big list of Old Testament heavy hitters, and then, oh, by the way, they didn't get what they wanted. Well, that's a bit sad. But actually, his point is slightly different. Whilst they did not receive what was promised in their lifetime, their promises were fulfilled. Each of their promises were fulfilled. It just didn't happen in their lifetime. But those promises wouldn't have been fulfilled without their faith in them.
Very good, yeah.
Without that faith, without the faith that they had, the promises would never have been fulfilled. And the author of Hebrews then goes on to say in chapter 12, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings to us so closely. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God." So what that doesn't mean is that this list of characters is now floating above your head and influencing your life. Samson's not there floating above your head. It could be like, oh, look at my lovely hair. That's not happening. That is not what this verse means. They're not like a family of ghosts who follow you around. Instead, what we see in this verse is almost like a lineage of faith. This cloud of witnesses, this idea is a lineage, it's a history of faith. So for example, let's take Abraham and Sarah. So for anyone who knows Abraham and Sarah's story, for a long time, they really struggled to have children. But a big part of God's promise to Abraham was that he would have land and children. So that was really hard. And eventually they did have children. That's one of the things that the author of Hebrews mentions here as a blessing from God. But the end promise of Abraham's descendants outnumbering the stars in the sky, Abraham didn't see that happen. Abraham wasn't there to see his descendants outnumber the stars in the sky. He didn't live to see that. Let's also take Moses, for example. Moses, who was promised that he would lead the nation of Israel to the promised land. That was his promise. And yet, in the book of Deuteronomy, he preaches essentially his final sermon to the people and then dies before ever getting to enter and be a part of that fulfilled promise. That's really tough, right? It's a big challenge. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering, Ellis, this is all very interesting, but how on earth does that relate to Hamilton? And that is hopefully where I'm going to pick it up and explain it to you now. You see, in that song, Washington is preparing them for the Battle of Yorktown, which I mentioned earlier. And in that song, he says, I know that we can win. I know that we can win. Washington has supreme confidence in their victory. He knows that it will take some work. He knows that it will take time, and he knows that it's a journey, but he knows that they're going to win. In Hebrews 12, verse 2, it talks about us running our race. Now, I think sometimes as Christians, we can think about running our race a bit like cross-country. Hands up if you did cross-country at school. Did we do cross-country? We remember cross-country. Hands up if you enjoyed cross-country. Okay, so just take a look around the room. Those are the people to stay clear of. I know Dina was saying, talk to everyone. Don't talk to the people who like cross-country. It's infectious. You never know, you might take up running. Quite scary. No, I didn't like cross-country because why did the PE teachers always pick the one day of summer that it was raining to do cross-country? Every single time it was like glorious sunshine, cross-country day, thunderstorm. Why? I don't want to run in a thunderstorm because the PE teachers are there with their umbrellas, their jackets, come on guys, get going. I don't see you running, mate. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely outrageous. The other thing about cross-country is that I never won, and I like winning. So I didn't really like cross-country because I never won, which was a bit of a nightmare. You see, the thing is that we can think of running our race like cross-country. Like I've got to run as hard as I can, and I've got to get first to qualify for the next stage of the thing, and then I can go on to the national event. And actually, running our race as Christians isn't like cross-country because the outcome of the race is already determined when you set off. Running your race isn't like cross-country because the outcome of the race is determined before you even set off. Your victory in this race that the author of Hebrews describes is victory. You have won. It's a bit more exciting than that. You've won. You've won. You have won your race. And I think that sometimes as Christians we can run our race and feel like we're fighting a losing battle. I felt that before. I know that feeling. But it's important to remember that Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, has run before us and achieved victory for every single one of us forever. Forever. Victory is assured, so we have to live victoriously. Now, that is an odd statement, but what I mean by that is that when we change our mindset from running a race that we feel like we're going to lose to running a race that victory is assured in, it changes how we live. It changes the way that we behave. Because living victoriously looks like being generous. Whereas feeling like you're losing that battle feels like, well, I've got to keep my money because you never know when the next storm's going to hit. You never know what's going to happen next. I was really challenged by that in my marriage. Beth Ann is super generous. And because I didn't have her victorious mindset, I was like, well, we can't give that away because what if this happens? And then if that happens, then what if this happens? And then the car explodes and then we have no money. And of course, that's not going to happen. Beth Ann lives victoriously and that has inspired me. Okay, I'm going to be generous. Living victoriously looks like speaking to people who feel like they're living in defeat. Because there are people in our worlds who we know who will live in defeat. Who you can see them walking around, they hang their heads, they know, I'm not welcome, I don't deserve this. It's our job as Christians to go to them, to show them there is a way to win your race, and it's through Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. So, victory is assured, so live victoriously. Point 1, I know that we can win. Point 2, history has its eyes on you, the name of the song. When he sings that, it gives me goosebumps every time. I absolutely love it. The name of the guy, by the way, is Christopher Jackson, and he also sang for Moana's dad in the film Moana. There you go. It's an interesting fact for you. So this idea of history has its eyes on you, it reminds me of this cloud of witnesses. It reminds me of this cloud of witnesses. I can't help but think of Moses and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. I can't help but think of the lineage of faith. Again, reminder, they're not ghosts, they're not following you around. It's a lineage of faith. I think that in this church, there are people who come from a lineage of faith. There are people who are in this building today because someone else in this room said, why don't you try coming to church? Or a family member who brought you to church. Just come and try it out. And you ended up sticking around. And particularly for some of our older members of our congregation, you will know of the lineage of faith that this building itself stands upon. I was thinking about this when I was planning this preach, and I looked around at this building, and I couldn't help but think that there are people who helped to build this building who have passed on. But they never got to see this, the fulfillment of their promise, the fulfillment of their faith. They lived by faith and they built this place. Whether that's financially or physically, they built this place. And we carry that with us. We stand on the shoulders of giants. We really do. There are so many people who I could go on and thank. I want to particularly just mention Sue Wooldridge and John Pink. Two people who I know have prayed for me and supported me and stood by me and encouraged me from afar. I want, Dina, as I was talking about this preach to Dina, she said this phrase, don't save the flowers for the funeral. If there's someone in this building who has inspired you, who has stood by you, whose journey you admire, tell them about it. Talk to them, tell them. Because that is this lineage of faith. That's where it comes from. The reason that we can look back on those Old Testament stories is because they were passed down verbally from generation to generation to generation. And eventually someone was like, hold on a second, guys, we need to write this down. I want us as New Life to have a lineage and a history like that. I would love that. For us to be able to pass down the stories of God's faithfulness from generation to generation. Just like Dina was saying earlier, there are kids and young people in this church who need Jesus more than ever. It's a crazy world out there. It really is. And I have such a passion for our young people, and I want them to know that we, as a church family, stand with them. Because they need us today, and they deserve us. So tell them your stories. Tell them your tales of God's faithfulness. Pray for them and love them. We can join that Hebrews list now. We can make a choice to live by faith and see promises fulfilled. There are people in this church, there are people on your hearts and on your minds who you think, I really wish they were here. We have a chance. We can make that happen. We can join that list now, this side of heaven. the final point that I want to make from this, so we've had, I know that we can win, this confidence in victory. We've had history has its eyes on you, joining this cloud of witnesses. And finally, Washington says in that song, who lives, who dies, and who tells your story. Whoa, big idea. He's essentially saying you have no control over that. You don't know who lives and who dies from this battle. You don't know who will tell your story. So live now. Live like history has its eyes on you. Quite controversial to agree with arguably the greatest American president of all time, but I'm going to give it a go. I do think that we have some control over this. Of course, we as Christians believe that God has ultimate control over life and death and all things. We absolutely believe that, and what a great hope to have. But I think we have control about who tells our story. There are people in this room who have testimonies that would shake the earth. Let's hear them, right? Share them. Tell people your story. Because your story has power. Your testimony can change lives. It really can. That's essentially what the Bible is. It's a collection of testimonies of God's faithfulness. So why don't we go and share our story, continue that lineage, and show people of the faithfulness of God? As we have run our races, God has blessed and kept and held us close throughout that. So why don't we tell people about that? Because that is the evidence that this world needs. It needs to see those practical moments of, okay, this person's actually got a testimony and a story about what God has done for them. That's incredible. And eventually, if those testimonies add up, that person will have no choice but to, okay, I'm going to have to come and see what they're all talking about, right? Live by faith, and your behavior will follow. You'll live victoriously, knowing that you have victory. Run your race. I'm not promising that it'll be easy, but run it. And persevere to the end to achieve that victory. And tell your story. And as part of that, actually, I want to tell a bit of my story, if that's okay. I'd like to invite the band up to join me for a moment. You see, a while ago, I went through a very difficult patch with my mental health. I struggled with my anxiety, and I found particularly my faith was hit the biggest by this. You know, when your brain's spinning around and you're asking all these questions, it can be really hard to ground yourself in God, because what if God's not real? And all of these what if questions that I would send me on spirals. And I went to a big conference, and there was a preach that, if I'm totally honest, didn't help me too much. It just kept that spiral going. I was like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? I'm at Bible college. I can't question these things now. It's a bit late now, isn't it? And I reached my hands into my jacket pocket. I don't normally do that. And in there was a small piece of paper. I was like, this is weird. I don't remember making a note or anything. So I pulled out this piece of paper, and on it was written Proverbs 3, verse 5. I'm going to read it for you now. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. To someone who was struggling and in the depths of not knowing what the point of anything was, to hear that, it's life-changing, right? I got home, and because I have to share everything with my mum, I told my mum about it. And she said, have you got the bit of paper? I said, yeah, sure, I do. And I carry it around with me in my wallet even now. So I showed it to my mum, and I said, do you recognize the writing? And she said, you'll never believe it, but I do. It belongs to your granddad. And I had absolutely no idea. And funnily enough, neither did my granddad. He couldn't remember when he put it there. But at one moment, at some point when I hadn't even noticed it, he had slipped or left something on the side or popped it in my jacket. And at the moment when I needed it most, it was there. See, my granddad had faith that God would fulfill his promise in my life. He had so much faith that just a Post-it note with a Bible verse written on it was enough to change my course. If God can do that with a Post-it note, think about what he can do with our story. So run your race, tell your stories, and live by faith and live victoriously. Thank you.